So normally when you're comparing consumption companies, consumer discretionary companies, we compare the PE ratio. Today we'll be comparing these valuations on the PEG ratio. What is a PEG ratio? I'm going to explain you before I start talking about the valuations. PEG ratio is just an enhancement in terms of the PE ratio by adding the expected earnings growth into the calculation. So the formula is what? PEG ratio is equal to PE divided by the earnings growth of the company. The earnings growth is normally a CAGR of 3-year basis is what you take. And in terms of just normal what you say in terms of a good undervalued company or an overvalued company in terms of PEG ratio, when the PEG ratio is lower than 1%, you consider the company to be a undervalued company, and over and above that, then depending on the valuations, you consider it overvalued. Yes, so now let's talk about the recent scenario. What is happening in the consumer discretionary space? What are you paying for? What are you actually getting? So let's talk about PE ratios. Normally, when you're comparing Trent, let me just pull up some examples for you all. So Trent, the PE ratio is 68 times. ABFRL, similar peer, is almost 44 times. This is FY24 PE is what I'm comparing, right? So when you're looking at Trent, suppose 68 times, while ABFRL, which is 44 times, what would you say is cheaper? You would be like, oh, ABFRL is cheaper. But let's bring in the growth now. So the revenue growth, the 3-year CAGR for Trent is 36 times, while for ABFRL is almost 12%. 36%, I beg your pardon, and 12%. Now let's divide it with PE ratios divided by the growth. So let's see what you get in terms of the PEG ratio. For Trent, the PEG ratio comes in at 1.9, while for ABFRL, the PEG ratio has come in at 3.7. So yes, when you take the metrics, PEG ratio, PEG valuation into consideration, Trent is actually cheaper than ABFRL because 1.9 times, it's closer to that time mark which you normally compare as an undervalued company. Similarly, there are a lot of other companies also. So, it also depends on the growth rate of the company, which is a factor which we are pulling into the play when you compare a PEG ratio. Just look at Relaxo. The valuation is in terms of PE valuation for FY24 is 63 times. The growth rate is in single digits, 4%, I beg your pardon. So obviously the PEG ratio comes in at 15.8 times. So when you're comparing the PEG ratio, it's very high in terms of valuations, and obviously you would be calling it overvalued if you actually take the PEG valuations into consideration. Similarly, when you're comparing Safari and VIP in the luggage and consumer discretionary space, when you compare both of them, seems like Safari is actually on the cheaper side and versus VIP in terms of PEG ratios, and similarly for Westlife Food Development. So overall, when the PE ratio may be high, but if your growth rate is also in single digits, then your PEG ratio turns out to be much higher, and that is the case coming in for most of these companies. When you compare a Westlife Development, Jubilant Foodwork, VIP Industries, all these have seen a single digit growth in terms of the last 3-year CAGR, revenue CAGR growth. And that is why, their PEG ratios are turning out to be much higher than other companies. So yes, do not forget the valuation. When you're comparing a valuation, not only PE, if you add the growth, you get a PEG ratio as well coming in, and which is an important factor we keep an eye out on. So in terms of those valuations, seems like, Westlife, Jubilant Foodwork would be more expensive compared to other companies like a Trent, Page, ABFRL in the consumer discretionary side. So that's the valuation factors coming in for consumer discretionaries today.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.